Welcome to the Phil and H Travel Podcast. Is it worth it?
Picture this for a second.
Yeah.
You are sitting in this tiny 19-seat aircraft. You look out the window, and you're flying directly toward a sheer vertical wall of solid volcanic rock, just jutting straight out of the ocean.
Which is terrifying.
Right, and the pilot doesn't pull up. Instead, the plane banks hard, drops altitude, and suddenly you realize you are plummeting toward a strip of tarmac so impossibly short that both ends literally fall off into the crashing surf.
Yeah, you just brace for impact.
Exactly. The wheels screech down, the engines roar into reverse, and you come to a stop with, just yards to spare. You survive the landing, only to step outside and realize your taxi ride to the hotel involves these 45-degree near-vertical switchback.
Hand-built switchbacks.
Built right into the side of a cliff, yeah. It is the ultimate adrenaline arrival.
It is wild. Welcome to Saba. Today, we are deep diving into this tiny 5-square-mile Dutch Caribbean island that aggressively and, proudly markets itself as the unspoiled queen.
Unspoiled queen, yeah.
But looking closely at the data for the 2026 and 2027 seasons, there is a very real, incredibly urgent tension building on this rock.
Oh, absolutely.
On one side of the ledger, you have one of the very last genuinely uncrowded islands in the entire Caribbean. There are absolutely zero cruise ships, zero massive, all-inclusive beach resort strips.
But on the other side of that ledger, a brand new 30-room luxury hotel called the Scenery just opened its doors in March 2026.
Right.
And because a development of that caliber requires a higher baseline of services, the pricing floor across this entire tiny island is starting to lift.
Yeah, the era of Saba being a pure under-the-radar budget bargain is actively closing. If you're planning a trip and want the honest, is it worth it verdict before you book, follow the show on Spotify or Apple.
So to really understand this island, we have to start by completely dismantling the average traveler's assumption about Caribbean economics.
I mean, you kind of have to throw the whole rule book out, right?
You do, because the main cost tension of choosing Saba isn't actually the cost of existing on the island itself. The massive financial filter is the access.
Yeah.
You cannot fly direct to Saba from North America, Europe, or, anywhere else. You can only get there by routing through the neighboring island of Sint Maarten. And that geographical bottleneck forces you into two very distinct, highly specialized and expensive choices.
Let's look at the aviation side first, because we were auditing the flight logs and the pricing algorithms for this deep dive, and the economics of this route are fascinating.
Oh, they're wild.
You are flying Winair onto what is officially the world's shortest commercial runway, the Wancho E. Iroskin Airport. It is roughly 1,300 feet long.
Just 1,300 feet.
Yeah. To put that in perspective for you, a typical commercial jet needs at least 6,000 feet to land safely.
Which fundamentally dictates the type of aircraft that can even attempt the landing. Winair operates a specialized fleet of twin-otter aircraft.
Right.
These are Stowell planes, short takeoff and landing. They have these high-lift wings and incredibly powerful turboprop engines designed specifically to just drop out of the sky and stop on a dime.
Yeah, but operating and maintaining a highly specialized fleet for a niche high-risk route like that, it's astronomically expensive.
Exactly. And that completely breaks normal flight pricing. Winair might advertise a starting rate of $134 for a one-way ticket.
Which sounds reasonable, right?
It does. But if you were booking for a prime week, dynamic pricing algorithms, which adjust the cost based on how many of those scarce 19 seats are left, they kick in violently.
Brutally.
Add in the taxes, and we are routinely seeing travelers pay between $400 and $500 for a round-trip ticket.
For a flight that spends less than 15 minutes in the air.
Yeah, that breaks down to over $30 a minute just to sit in the seat.
Exactly. So if you look at that math and say, absolutely not, I'll take the boat, well, you are looking at the ferry.
Right, the Makana or the Edge.
Yeah, and that runs between $55 and $75 one way. But as we'll get into later, that ferry relies on open ocean conditions that can and will cancel your trip entirely.
And that access bottleneck, it serves as a natural filter. It forces us to establish exactly who this island is not for.
Right.
That is the fundamental key to understanding why its economy operates the way it does. The contrarian claim here, the thing that shocks most first-time visitors, is that Saba is one of the very few islands in the Caribbean where the primary problem is not over-tourism.
No, not at all.
The problem is that it is structurally difficult to reach, it is disproportionately expensive for its physical footprint, and it utterly shatters the mental image most people hold of a tropical vacation.
I want to emphasize that phrase. It shatters a mental image. If your psychological definition of a vacation requires walking out of your hotel room feeling warm white sand between your toes and like, being handed a pina colada while Jimmy Buffett plays in the background,
Do not book this ticket.
do not book it. I'm issuing our first formal skip warning right now. Skip Saba if you need a beach holiday. We cannot stress this enough.
It's so true. I mean, Saba is a dormant volcano jutting straight out of the sea. There is essentially zero swimmable beach.
Yeah, zero.
There is one small stretch of volcanic black sand at a place called Wells Bay, but it's purely seasonal. Depending on the ocean currents and the winter swells, the sand literally washes away into the deep water for months at a time, leaving nothing but jagged boulders.
So if you eliminate the beach entirely, the entire value proposition of this island rests on its raw vertical nature, which is why the 2026 opening of the Scenery Hotel is such a massive pivot point.
Huge pivot point.
Because up until now, this island has run almost entirely on small, rustic dive lodges and family-owned guest houses. Now you have a 30-key luxury property with an infinity pool and direct rainforest access.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this using like a gentrification domino analogy. Think about a quiet, industrial, overlooked urban neighborhood. The second, an ultra-high-end coffee shop and a luxury boutique hotel open on the corner, it acts like a domino falling.
Oh, totally.
It sends a massive market signal that luxury capital is safe to deploy here. When you have a tiny island of just 2,000 local residents and you suddenly introduce a dedicated luxury tier, the whole price ladder lifts behind it.
Right.
The local restaurants realize they can stock higher-end wines because the clientele can afford it. The taxi drivers see more high-net-worth fares. The underlying cost of simply keeping the lights on goes up.
It creates a permanent economic shift. And, we have to factor in the reality of the currency here, too. Everything on the island is priced in U.S. dollars.
Oh, right, because the USD is the legal currency of the Caribbean Netherlands.
Exactly, which on one hand offers a totally frictionless psychological experience for North American travelers. You aren't doing mental math at the dinner table trying to divide by 62 to convert pesos or guilders or whatever.
Yeah, that part is nice.
But frictionless does not mean cheap. In fact, it often masks how expensive things are until you look at your credit card statement. And speaking of cash, you need it for the departure tax.
Oh, the physical cash requirement.
Yeah, if you fly out of Saba, there is a $10 tax that must be handed over in physical cash at the tiny airport counter.
Right. They don't take cards for that. So because the beach is totally out of the equation, everything you do on Saba happens outdoors, either deep underwater or high up on a mountain trail. That means when you go, doesn't just influence your trip, it dictates your entire risk profile.
Absolutely.
The weather trade-offs on this island are brutally stark. Let's look at the meteorological data we pulled for this deep dive. The dry season runs from December through April. This is when the atmospheric conditions stabilize.
It is the best time.
You get steady trade winds from the east, sweeping the clouds out. The dive visibility down on the offshore pinnacles is pristine, often exceeding 100 feet. But because the conditions are perfect, this is also when room demand peaks and prices hit their absolute firmest ceiling.
Conversely, you have the wet season, specifically the core hurricane window from August to October. And this isn't just about getting a little rained on during your hike.
No, it's way more disruptive.
When tropical systems move through the Atlantic, they generate massive oceanic swells. Those swells violently crash against the harbor at Forebay, forcing the Makana and Edge ferries to cancel their crossings from Sint Maarten entirely.
You're just stuck.
You're stuck. The high winds force Winair to ground those twin otters. Even if you manage to arrive just before a storm, the torrential rain washes massive amounts of sediment and volcanic soil down the sheer cliffs directly into the ocean.
Yeah.
That runoff absolutely destroys the underwater dive visibility, which ruins the primary reason most people visit.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If the formal Atlantic hurricane season stretches all the way from June to November, what about those shoulder months? I'm talking June, July, and November. Are those months a smart, calculated gamble for budget travelers trying to sneak in and save money, or are they a total logistical trap?
I mean, they are the purest definition of a calculated gamble. If you look at historical booking data, you will absolutely find softer availability and more willing negotiation from the guest house owners on room rates during those months.
Okay, so you can save some money.
You can, but the trade-off is massive.
Yeah.
You are absorbing the genuine statistical risk that your transportation will fail. You are trading a bit of financial certainty for severe logistical anxiety.
Right.
You might save $200 on your room, only to spend $400 getting stranded in Sint Maarten when a tropical depression kicks up.
Yeah, that math doesn't work out. But let's look at the other major factor dictated by the season, which is the crowd density, or more accurately, the stunning lack of it. We mentioned the absolute ultimate crowd control feature of Saba earlier. There are 0 cruise ships.
0.
And I want to clarify something for you. It is not because the local government nobly voted against them to protect their peace. It is because the island physically, geologically, cannot accommodate them.
No, the bathymetry, the underwater topography, is the gatekeeper here. The ocean floor drops off so violently close to the shore that you cannot build a massive deep-water pier.
There's nowhere to anchor.
Furthermore, there is physically nowhere for 3,000 passengers to disembark at once. The roads are too narrow for standard tour buses.
That is a massive asset for you as a traveler. It means you never experience what I call tender day surges, where thousands of people are ferried ashore, turning a sleepy village into a chaotic mall for 6 hours.
Yeah, that's the worst.
You never see the streets suddenly become impassable. You never experience those insidious cruise crowd pricing spikes where a local cafe suddenly doubles the price of a sandwich on a Tuesday just because a ship is anchored offshore.
Because the scale is intimate. The entire island population is roughly 2,000 people.
Yeah.
They're spread across 4 distinct villages.
Huh.
You have the bottom, which sits in a bowl-shaped valley and serves as the administrative capital.
Okay.
Then you have windward side, sitting much higher up, which is the primary hub for tourists, where most of the dining and dive shops are located. You have St. John's, which is mostly residential. And you have Zion's Hill, heavily known by locals as Hell's Gate, which clings to the cliff right near the airport.
So even when the island is operating at maximum capacity, it doesn't feel busy in the way a place like Cancun or even Aruba feels busy.
Exactly. Tourist pressure on Saba is highly localized. It concentrates almost entirely in the few blocks of windward side and down at the Fort Bay Harbor in the mornings when the dive boats head out. Even at its absolute peak, a crowded day on Saba just means that every tank on the dive boat is spoken for, and you might actually have to call ahead to get a table for dinner at Brigadoon. It never means a packed promenade or fighting for space on a sidewalk.
Except for Carnival, right?
Right. The singular exception to this rule is the Saba Carnival, which happens in late July into early August. That is the one time of the year when the diaspora returns, the parties fill the streets, and the island hits genuine, absolute maximum capacity.
Taking all that into account, how do you time this trip?
Yeah.
Let's break down the traveler timing calculus. If you are a diver, you have one mandate: target the dry season. The entire allure of the Saba National Marine Park rests on these incredible offshore pinnacles names like Third Encounter and Diamond Rock.
Yeah, and we need to explain what those pinnacles actually are because it explains why they are so vital.
Yeah, they aren't normal reefs.
No, these aren't just coral reefs. They are massive columns of magma from ancient, extinct volcanic activity that push up from the deep ocean floor but stop just shy of the surface.
Wow.
Because they act as a physical wall against deep ocean currents, they force cold, nutrient-rich water up toward the light. That upwelling attracts massive amounts of pelagic life reef sharks, sea turtles, huge schools of jacks.
Oh, that sounds incredible.
It is. But because these pinnacles are in open, deep water, you need calm surface conditions to safely moor the dive boat and safely enter the water. If the winter swells are raging, you physically cannot dive them.
Okay, so the divers are locked into the dry season. But what if you are coming primarily as a hiker? Do you have more flexibility?
Hikers have a slightly different equation, but it still heavily favors the dry months. You can technically hike year-round, but the centerpiece of the island's trail system is Mount Scenery.
The big one.
Yeah, at 887 meters, which is about 2,910 feet, it is actually the highest geographical point in the entire Kingdom of the Netherlands, which always makes for a great trivia question.
That's a great fun fact.
Yeah.
But getting to the top of that peak is not a casual stroll.
Not at all. To reach the summit, you have to climb a trail composed of well over 1,000 hand-carved stone and concrete steps ascending straight up through a cloud forest.
My quads are seizing up just hearing the words 1,000 stone steps.
They will burn. It is a grueling cardiovascular challenge. And here's how the weather dictates the hike.
Yeah.
If you attempt that climb in the wet season, Those 1,000 steps become coated in moss and relentless rain, turning them into a massive slip-and-fall hazard.
Yeah, that sounds dangerous.
It is. Furthermore, during the wet months, the summit is almost permanently wrapped in a dense, saturated cloud layer, meaning you do an hour and a half of brutal stair climbing just to stand in a whiteout fog with zero visibility.
So the overarching booking rule is this. Because the island's commercial room inventory is measured in dozens, not hundreds, you must lock in your dry season or carnival inventory many months in advance. And crucially, if you choose to gamble on the hurricane shoulder season, absolutely avoid booking tight, one-night flight connections through Sint Maarten. You need a buffer.
Yes, a big buffer.
Which brings us to the logistics on the ground, because knowing when to go is completely useless if you aren't prepared for the sheer physical shock of navigating the island once you survive that incredible plane or ferry arrival.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the ground infrastructure, starting with the most famous piece of engineering on the island. It is literally just called the road, capital T, capital R.
And the history of the road is vital to understanding the island's spirit.
Oh, this story is amazing.
For decades in the early 20th century, top Dutch civil engineers surveyed the island and officially declared it was physically impossible to build a road on Saba. The vertical gradients were too steep, the rock was too unforgiving.
They just said, no, it can't be done.
Right. So the locals, led by a man named Josephus Lambert Hassel, who literally took a correspondence course in civil engineering, just started building it themselves by hand in the 1930s.
It's an incredible story of defiance. It is a singular engineering marvel that snakes its way from Fort Bay up to the bottom, twisting through Windward Side, and dropping down to the airport in a series of terrifying, steep switchback.
It is spectacular to look at, but it violently dictates everything about your daily mobility.
Yeah.
You cannot just call an Uber on Saba.
No Uber.
There is no Lyft. There are no massive chain taxi fleets waiting at a stand. There isn't even a real scheduled public bus network. You are entirely reliant on a small, dedicated pool of local, independent taxi drivers.
And what does that mean for the budget? A typical transfer, say, getting off the plane and taking a taxi up to your guest house in Windward Side, or taking a taxi from your hotel down to the harbor for your morning dive, runs about $10 to $20 each way, depending on the exact distance.
Right.
If you want to hire a driver for a full island historical tour, that price scales up significantly. Now, because public transit essentially doesn't exist, hitchhiking is a deeply ingrained part of the culture. It is perfectly normal, highly accepted, and incredibly safe to stick your thumb out.
It really is.
Okay, let me push back on this, though. If I'm a fiercely independent traveler and I despise waiting for taxis or relying on the kindness of strangers for a ride, I'm just going to rent a car, right? Doesn't that give me total logistical freedom to explore?
Technically, yes. Rental cars do exist on the island, mostly provided by local garages. But in practical reality, for a first-time visitor, getting behind the wheel here is a genuinely terrifying experience.
Because of the steepness.
Yes, you have to understand the physical environment. You are dealing with incredibly steep, grinding grades. You're navigating blind switchbacks where you cannot see what is coming around the corner. The lanes are exceptionally narrow, often bordered by a sheer rock wall on your left and a massive unguarded drop-off into a valley on your right.
And I'm assuming it's mostly manual transmissions because you need the low gears for the hills.
Exactly. Unless you have significant, confident experience driving a manual transmission in extreme mountainous terrain, the theoretical freedom of a rental car is immediately vastly outweighed by the sheer white-knuckle stress of actually operating it.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
It is. The local taxi drivers know every inch of that road. They know exactly who is coming around the blind corner, and paying them the $20 is worth every penny in saved anxiety.
So the vibe check upon arrival is this incredible, stark contrast. Spiritually, psychologically, it is the easiest place in the world to arrive. There is almost zero crime. The island geography operates as a closed system, so there's nowhere for criminals to run.
Literally nowhere.
Because of that, there are zero aggressive touts trying to sell you braided bracelets or cheap excursions at the harbor. The locals are genuinely welcoming. They will actually look you in the eye as you walk past and say good morning.
It's very sweet.
But physically, it is utterly exhausting. Nothing is flat. There is no casual strolling. Walking from your guest house in Windward Side to a restaurant just 3 blocks away is a cardiovascular workout that will leave you sweating through your shirt before dinner.
Which perfectly explains the real estate logic of the island. Because the terrain is so unforgiving, where you choose to put your bags down dictates your daily logistical spend. The lodging ladder on Saba requires highly strategic thinking. Let's start at the entry level.
The backpacker budget tier.
Exactly. Though we have to put budget in heavy air quotes on Saba, the absolute floor for a room, the cheapest place you can lay your head, is going to run between 89 and 110 US dollars a night.
Okay, so roughly $100.
Yeah. This gets you a basic room in a guest house or a small, simple dive hotel. There are no $15 a night hostel dorms with bunk beds here. If you are booking in this tier, you absolutely want to locate yourself in Windward Side.
This is the walking.
Right. It is the best base because it clusters the maximum amount of restaurants, grocery stores, and dive shop offices into a walkable radius, minimizing your daily taxi spend.
Moving one rung up the ladder, we hit the mid-range couple. Here, we are talking 130 to 220 US dollars a night. This gets you into established, highly respected, long-running spots like Juliana's Hotel or the Cottage Club.
Juliana's is great.
Juliana's is a phenomenal case study of this tier because it has a small pool, it has deep institutional ties to the local dive scene, and it has an incredibly loyal repeat customer base that returns year after year.
Absolutely.
But you have to accept the economic trade-off of where you are. You are paying what we call island logistics prices, meaning the cost of your room heavily reflects the sheer difficulty and expense of importing materials, maintaining a pool, and operating a hospitality business on a vertical rock in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, water is expensive.
The room itself might be relatively modest compared to a $200 room in Mexico, but what you are truly paying for is extreme walkability, incredible views, and seamless daily logistics.
Then we have the family tier. And let's be bluntly honest, Saba is not fundamentally built for families, at least not in the traditional mass-market resort sense. There are no kids' clubs with face painting.
No water slides.
No sprawling mega resorts with lazy rivers. The only practical option for a family is renting a multi-room traditional Saban cottage or a small independent villa. This generally runs between $200 and $350 a night.
And then the headline for 2026. The luxury and comfort tier.
This is where the ceiling is actively rising and pulling the rest of the market with it. Historically, Queen's Gardens Resort, which sits high up on a ridge above the bottom, has been the primary upscale option.
Which is beautiful.
It is. It offers massive suites set deep into the rainforest, complete with a beautiful pool and high-end dining. But now, the newly opened Scenery is pushing peak rates into the several $100s range, sometimes exceeding $400 to $500 a night in peak season.
Let me push back on this luxury concept, though. If I am looking to drop $500 a night on a Caribbean vacation, I am conditioned to expect a private cabana, a beach butler handing me cold towels, and the sound of waves lapping against the sand. You're telling me people are paying $500 a night on Saba to look at a cloud forest and have absolutely zero beach access. Isn't that a ripoff?
If you judge it by the standard Cancun metric, yes. But you have to redefine what luxury means in this context. On Saba, luxury isn't about being pampered on a beach. It is about absolute, profound isolation.
Isolation as a luxury.
Exactly. It is about the psychological luxury of total silence, of sitting in an infinity pool suspended over a rainforest gorge, knowing there isn't a cruise ship within 50 miles. You're paying a premium for extreme exclusivity and pristine ecology. But your pushback highlights the vital underlying point. Across all of these tiers, from the $89 basic room to the $500 rainforest suite, there is a total absence of a beach. No matter what you spend, you still have to factor transportation dependency and daily physical exertion into your lodging choice.
Because that hotel room just ate anywhere from $100 to $500 of your daily budget, you might be thinking, okay, I'll just save some cash by cooking my own meals or eating cheap street food. But the island's geography actively works against your food budget, too.
Oh, massively.
On an island where almost every single calorie you consume arrives by boat, feeding yourself requires a specific strategy and a recalibration of what things should cost. Let's look at the dining scene. It is highly concentrated in Windward Side, with a few additional great spots down in the bottom.
Yeah.
We audited the most frequently recommended spots, and there are some heavy hitters here. In Windward Side, you have Brigadoon and the Long Haul Grill, which are staples for divers coming back hungry. Tropics Cafe, which is attached to Juliana's, is excellent for casual meals where you actually get a stunning view down the valley. Then you have the absolute institutions, Ches Bubba for a more refined meal, and Swinging Doors, which is essentially the social heartbeat of the island for expats and locals alike.
And if you are trying to stretch that budget by self-catering in your cottage kitchen, you will become intimately familiar with Big Rock Market. But here is the massive reality check that shocks people. Because the island produces very little of its own food commercially, prices broadly exceed U.S. mainland levels.
We need to trace the supply chain to explain why the food costs what it does, rather than just listing prices. Let's take a simple liter of milk or a basic steak.
It's a perfect example. That liter of milk likely starts at a dairy farm in Europe or the U.S. Midwest. It is processed, packaged, and put on a refrigerated truck to a massive port like Miami.
Okay, so it's already traveled 1,000 miles.
Right. From Miami, it is loaded onto a massive container ship that sails down the Caribbean chain to the deep-water port in Sint Maarten. It is offloaded in Sint Maarten, sits in a holding facility, and then must be physically transferred onto the smaller Makana ferry or a dedicated cargo boat.
Another boat ride.
That smaller boat fights the rough, open ocean swells to reach Saba's tiny Fort Bay harbor. It is offloaded again by crane, packed into a small manual transmission box truck, and driven in low gear up incredibly steep, grinding switchbacks to reach Big Rock Market in Windward Side.
So when you pay $4 for that liter of milk, you aren't paying for the milk. You are paying for the diesel fuel, the maritime insurance, the stevedores in 3 different ports, and the wear and tear on the truck's transmission.
Exactly. The geography dictates an inescapable import tax.
Let's break down those concrete USD prices so you can build an accurate mental budget. A typical main course at a sit-down restaurant will run between $15 and $28. If you are doing a mid-range dinner for 2, maybe a couple of burgers, or a fresh catch, including a couple of drinks, you are looking at $60 to $90. A local beer is $3 to $5.
And water is an interesting nuance here.
Oh, right, the cisterns.
Yeah, the tap water on Saba is almost exclusively rainwater, collected in massive underground cisterns built into the foundation of every house and hotel. While locals drink it, most short-term visitors choose to stick to bottled or heavily filtered water to avoid any stomach adjustments. A bottle of water costs about $1.50 to $2.50.
Coffee.
A cappuccino or a coffee in the morning will be $3 to $4.50.
And back to the grocery store reality. That loaf of bread, imported or baked with imported flour, is $3 to $5. Grabbing a basic sandwich or a quick lunch plate to go between dives will run you $8 to $14. Now, there is one weird silver lining here. If you're coming from the US, there is a strange psychological comfort in not having to do currency conversion math. Since the US dollar is the official currency, mental budgeting is incredibly easy, even if the actual prices sting a bit when you hand over the $20 bill. What about the etiquette when dining?
The etiquette is refreshingly simple and unpretentious. The vibe is decidedly low-key. Tipping 10 to 15% is the standard norm in restaurants, though you absolutely should check the bill first, as some establishments add a service charge automatically, and you don't want to double tip unnecessarily.
Good tip.
But the most critical piece of dining etiquette and logistics is that kitchens close early. This is a dive and hike island. People are exhausted by sunset. This is not an island for a 10 p.m. dinner reservation. If you walk out looking for food at 9:30 p.m., you will likely be eating granola bars from your suitcase.
So, taking those room rates, those heavily imported food costs, and those unavoidable taxi fares, what does an actual 24-hour cycle cost for different personas? Let's exclude the international airfare to Sint Maarten and just look at the required ground game.
Let's run the math strictly. For a backpacker or budget traveler on a non-dive day, a realistic baseline budget is $130 to $180 a day.
Which isn't terrible.
No, it breaks down as $90 to $110 for the simple room, $25 to $40 for self-catered groceries, and maybe one cheap lunch out, $5 to $15 for a shared taxi ride, and a small financial buffer.
But no one goes to Saba just to sit in a basic room. The entire point is the marine park.
Right. The overrun trigger for budget travelers is always the diving. The moment you add a dive, your day instantly jumps to between $200 and $250. A $60 to $80 single dive or a $150 two-tank morning changes the baseline math completely.
Moving up to the mid-range traveler, calculated on a per-person basis, assuming a couple traveling together, you are looking at $220 to $320 a day per person. That assumes you are sharing the cost of a $140 to $220 room, so $70 to $110 per person.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You are spending $45 to $70 on better restaurant food, $15 to $25 on private taxi transport, and allocating $90 to $140 on premium activities like guided hikes or multi-tank dives, plus a buffer. Now let me challenge the family rating. You mentioned a family of 4 earlier. Why is this so expensive if they aren't paying for Disney-level theme parks?
Because a family of 4 cannot squeeze into a tiny $89 dive room. They require a multi-room cottage. The daily total for a family easily runs $450 to $650.
Wow, per day.
Yes. They're forced to spend $250 to $400 on that larger lodging, $120 to $180 feeding 4 mouths at island prices, and $30 to $60 on transport because you can't easily hitchhike with 2 kids.
Right.
That means a week on Saba for a family easily hits $3,500 to $5,000 before you even buy a single plane ticket.
And the luxury couple.
They are burning $600 to well over $1,000 a day. They are paying for that $350 to $500+ rainforest suite, $120 to $200 on fine dining and wine, $60 to $120 on private on-call taxis, plus premium dive packages and spa treatments.
I want to highlight the digital nomad reality here too. Saba is not a classic digital nomad hub like Medellin or Bali, largely because the amenity base is so thin, but if you do decide to stay for a month to write a book or code in peace, it runs $3,000 to $4,500 a month.
Which is high for the region.
It is. That's $1,800 to $2,800 for a negotiated long-stay cottage, $700 to $1,000 for groceries, $150 to $300 for transport, and a few hundred for miscellaneous activities. But if you are a digital nomad, you might look at that $3,000 budget and think, I can swing that for a month of peace. But let's look at your daily technical reality. You open your laptop to jump on a crucial Zoom call, and the internet drops.
Yep, the microwave links.
Why? Because the island's internet heavily relies on microwave radio links beamed across the ocean from Sint Maarten. When a massive tropical downpour hits, the rain physically scatters the radio waves, degrading the signal. Your connection dies because of the weather. That is the kind of hidden friction that makes remote work here difficult.
What's fascinating about all this math is what people consistently underestimate versus what is actually an incredible value. Well, travelers constantly underestimate the sheer cumulative cost of moving between villages and taxis, and they forget about that $10 cash departure tax until they are standing at the airport counter digging through their pockets.
Yeah, that catches everyone.
But the profound value is found in the things that actually matter. The quality of the marine park diving is genuinely world-class for the price. The incredible network of hiking trails is entirely free to use, and you never, ever pay those inflated, artificial cruise ship day surcharges that plague the rest of the Caribbean.
And even if you budget perfectly, even if you accept the taxi costs and the grocery prices, Saba has 3 highly specific structural logistical traps that routinely penalize first-time visitors who don't know any better. Let's name them and break down exactly how they catch people. Trap number 1. The Sint Maarten connection trap. We touched on this, but explain the mechanics of how this ruins a trip.
Think of Sint Maarten's airport, SXM, as the massive central drive gear in a complicated watch, and the Saba ferries and Winair flights as tiny, fragile cogs spinning off it.
Okay, good visual.
Because there are no direct international flights to Saba, every single traveler must route through that main gear in SXM. If you are flying in on a major airline, say Delta from Atlanta or KLM from Amsterdam, and your long-haul flight is delayed by even a single hour due to a thunderstorm or a mechanical issue, the main gear stutters.
And when it stutters...
When it stutters, those tiny cogs snap off completely. You will miss the final 15-minute Winair flight before sunset or the final ferry departure.
And the penalty for missing that connection is severe. You are suddenly forced to book an unplanned last-minute hotel in Sint Maarten, which is not a cheap island, pay for dinner there, and pay airline rebooking fees.
Easily.
That is a $150 to $400 penalty, plus the heartbreaking loss of an entire day of your hard-earned vacation. The fix is incredibly simple, but requires discipline. Build a deliberate buffer night in Sint Maarten on your way in. Book a cheap room near the airport, have a nice dinner, and take the first flight or ferry to Saba the next morning.
Yes, absolutely.
Do not try to thread the needle on a same-day connection if your international arrival lands anywhere past the early afternoon.
Trap number 2, the weather cancellation trap. This is a cascading failure mechanism. As we discussed, the runway and the ferry route are entirely exposed to wind and open ocean swell.
When the weather turns violently, the transport just stops, period. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how important your meeting back home is.
Exactly. The penalty here is being stranded, and it can happen on either end. You might be stranded on Saba trying to leave, panicking as you miss your international flight home, or you might be stranded on Sint Maarten trying to arrive, burning days of your vacation in a transit hub.
It's a nightmare.
The financial penalty is covering extra nights of lodging, anywhere from $90 to $500 plus, facing exorbitant rebooking fees for your main flight home.
So how do you fix that one?
The fix is twofold. First, pad your departure by scheduling a full buffer day on the back end of your trip, ideally spending your last night in Sint Maarten. Second, you must absolutely purchase comprehensive travel insurance that explicitly covers weather-inclusive travel disruptions.
Right.
If your work schedule back home is rigidly tight and you cannot afford even a single day's delay, skip Saba entirely during the peak hurricane months of August to October.
Trap number 3, the no-beach, all-vertical reality trap. The mechanism here is pure, unadulterated psychology. It is what I call the Caribbean instinct. People look at a map, they see an island located near St. Bart's and Anguilla, and their brain subconsciously fills in the blanks.
Oh, they totally do.
They expect flat ground, palm trees leaning gracefully over white sand, and easy sunset strolls from the hotel to the bar.
And the penalty for that psychological assumption is bitter, furious disappointment and massive unplanned expenses. Because they didn't realize they couldn't just walk out of their hotel and lay on a beach, they end up relying heavily on taxis, adding $20 to $60 a day, just trying to find things to do to fill the time they thought they'd spend sunbathing.
It is exactly like booking a hyper-expensive elite ski resort in the Alps because you love the aesthetic of snow and mountains, arriving with your bags and getting furiously angry that there isn't a massive indoor ice skating rink and a shopping mall.
That's a perfect analogy.
You have to know what you are buying. The product on Saba is vertical adventure. Skip this island immediately if a beach is a non-negotiable for your happiness.
Those logistical traps, the connections, the weather, the psychological mismatch, are genuinely the real dangers of Saba. Which brings us to a very counterintuitive safety profile. Because while the logistics are treacherous, the human threat profile is virtually non-existent.
When we look at the crime statistics, violent and petty crime are incredibly statistically low. And again, it's not magic. It's a closed-loop community of 2,000 people living on an isolated rock. Everyone knows everyone.
Right.
If you steal a camera, everyone on the island will know by dinner, and there is literally nowhere to run and nowhere to hide.
Precisely. The dominant hazards on Saba are entirely natural. The steep, slippery terrain on Mount Scenery is a very real risk for twisted ankles, torn ligaments, or falls, especially in the wet season. The offshore diving on the pinnacles involves deep water, often dropping past 100 feet in strong sweeping currents.
It's not for beginners.
No. Making it suited primarily for advanced divers, not novices who just got their open water certification in a swimming pool.
And this raises a critical point about the medical reality of the island.
It does. The island has a small basic medical center that is highly capable of stabilizing patients, stitching up cuts, and handling minor emergencies. But for any severe catastrophic trauma, or crucially for divers, if someone gets bent and needs a recompression chamber, they cannot be treated on Saba.
Let's explain what getting bent actually means for the non-divers listening, because it dictates the medical urgency. Decompression sickness happens when a diver breathes compressed air at depth. The high pressure forces nitrogen gas to dissolve into their body tissues.
Right.
If they ascend to the surface too quickly, or if they fly in an airplane too soon after diving, the pressure drops too fast. That dissolved nitrogen violently turns back into gas bubbles inside their bloodstream and joints, much like opening a shaken bottle of soda.
It is agonizingly painful and can be fatal.
The only cure is to put the patient inside a recompression chamber, which physically forces the pressure back up to dissolve the bubbles and then slowly brings them back down. Saba does not have a functional manned chamber for tourists.
Which means if you get bent, or if you take a severe fall on the mountain, you must be medically evacuated by helicopter or specialized boat to Sint Maarten or another major island. Good medical evacuation insurance is not a luxury add-on here. It is an absolute necessity.
So how does the safety profile break down by demographic? For solo female travelers, the consensus across all the travel logs and blogs we audited is that Saba is extremely safe. The village core and windward side is easily walkable at night, and street harassment is virtually non-existent.
That's great to hear.
The only real caution is a wilderness one. Always tell the owner of your guest house exactly which hiking route you are taking before you head into the cloud forest, just in case you twist an ankle.
For families, as we debated earlier, the safety profile is incredibly poor for wandering toddlers because of the sheer cliffs and the total lack of shallow, calm, wading water. But it is perfectly fine and actually incredibly engaging for active, older teens who want to hike and dive.
Right.
Emphasizing the psychological comfort is key here. Yes, the terrain is physically uncomfortable. Yes, the remoteness adds layers of logistical stress to your planning. But psychologically, once you are there, there's no tout culture. No one is following you down the street trying to sell you a sunset catamaran tour. There are no aggressive vendors hawking cheap souvenirs. You are left in absolute glorious peace.
So, assuming you embrace the vertical terrain, you successfully survive the Sint Maarten gear connection, and you accept the grocery prices, what are the actual tangible highs and lows once you have your boots on the ground? Let's start with the highlights.
The absolute crown jewel is diving the Saba Marine Park. We explained the geology of the offshore pinnacle's third encounter and diamond rock.
Yes, those magma columns.
You're diving around dramatic volcanic spires, swimming alongside reef sharks, massive sea turtles, and even finding delicate seahorses hidden in the closer, shallower reefs. Local operators like Sea Saba and Saba Divers run excellent, highly professional, safety-conscious operations.
And the cost.
You were looking at spending about $110 to $150 for a 2-tank morning dive, plus a small nature fee that goes directly back into funding the marine park's conservation efforts.
Then you have the hiking. Summiting Mount Scenery is the obvious rite of passage, but there is also a trail called the Ladder. This is a historic, near-vertical stone stairway carved directly into the cliff face, leading from the customs house right down to the crashing sea.
Ooh, the ladder is intense.
Before the modern harbor was blasted into the rock, every single piece of cargo that arrived on the island, from saxiflower and lumber to literal grand pianos, had to be carried up these steps by hand by the locals.
Wow.
Hiking down and back up is a brutal, quad-burning experience, but it forms an incredible visceral link to the island's stubborn history. And honestly, the overall vibe is a highlight in itself. Sitting on a terrace in windward side, having a coffee in the morning breeze, and realizing you are sharing the entire village with maybe 20 other tourists, it's magical.
It is. But we have to balance that magic with the honest letdowns. We have hammered this point relentlessly, but the seasonal, often totally absent black sand beach at Wells Bay is a massive letdown if you arrived holding on to any residual hopes for a lazy beach day.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Furthermore, the access friction is genuinely exhausting. By the time you reach your hotel room, you have been traveling, waiting, and white-knuckling for a very long time. And the costs are high for an island with such a small footprint.
I'd add the early restaurant closures to the letdowns list. If you are a night owl who loves to dine at 9 p.m. and bar hop until 2 a.m. listening to live music, you will despise it here. The island rolls up its sidewalks by 9 p.m.
That's very true.
Also, the photos online lie by omission. They never accurately capture the relentless steepness of the roads. Instagram will show you Mount Scenery bathed in golden sunlight, but it won't show you how often that peak is completely engulfed in a viewless, dripping wet cloud, turning your grand summit photo into a picture of a gray wall of fog.
The ultimate takeaway here is that Saba is massively wildly overrated if you treat it as a general Caribbean destination. But it is perfectly accurately rated if you understand that it is strictly a specialist island.
Exactly.
If you are there solely for the diving, don't let the new luxury market convince you to overpay for a $500 room at the Scenery when a comfortable $90 bed at a guest house between dives is all you actually need.
If those letdowns, the total lack of beaches, the sheer verticality, the early bet times, the difficult access, are deal breakers for you, where do you go instead?
Let's look at two specific alternatives in the region. Alternative 1, Sint Eustatius, which everyone locally calls Statia. Why does this island compare?
Statia is essentially Saba's sister island. It is also a tiny Dutch Caribbean special municipality. It is entirely cruise-free, just like Saba. It uses the US dollar, making budgeting just as frictionless. You also reach it via those same Winair flights from Sint Maarten.
Okay. very similar access.
And much like Saba, instead of sprawling white beaches, its centerpiece is a dormant volcano you can hike called the Quill. How does the on-the-ground cost compare?
It is broadly similar because it shares the same supply chain issues, though lodging is slightly cheaper. You can generally find a solid room for 90 to 180 US dollars a night.
So what are the pros and cons of pivoting your trip to Statia instead of Saba?
Statia is much better if you are deeply interested in colonial history and archaeology. In the 18th century, it was known as the Golden Rock and was literally the busiest trading port in the world, heavily involved in supplying the American Revolution. There are ruins everywhere. It also offers even more extreme, profound solitude than Saba.
But the cons.
But it is worse if you want dramatic, world-class pinnacle diving. While the diving is good, it doesn't match Saba's topography. Furthermore, Statia's dining and tourism infrastructure is even less developed than Saba's, meaning fewer restaurant choices and rougher logistics.
Alternative 2 is a bit further south, Dominica, famously branded as the nature island. Why does this compare? Because it is incredibly rugged, is deeply mountainous, and it aggressively prioritizes jungle adventure over beach lounging.
Exactly. And the cost profile on Dominica is generally cheaper on the ground. Because it has more agricultural capacity, food is slightly cheaper, and you can easily find mid-range rooms for $100 to $180. It is also much easier to reach with broader flight options from other Caribbean hubs, avoiding the strict Sint Maarten bottleneck.
The pros of Dominica are the sheer scale of the place. Because it's much larger, you have massive, thundering waterfalls, a literal boiling volcanic lake you can hike to, and natural hot springs.
Which sounds amazing.
It is. But the con is that very same scale, because it is much bigger, it is much busier, it has cruise ship ports. You completely lose that incredibly intimate 2,000-person, locked-in-time village feel that makes Saba so unique.
Right. Well, it is time to bring all this math, the intricate weather risks, the supply chain realities, and the logistics into our final definitive verdicts.
Let's run the Is It Worth It matrix.
For the backpacker, I give this a strict 6 out of 10. It is worth it for serious, dedicated dive and hike enthusiasts who are willing to accept paying $90 to $110 for a very basic room. Skip it immediately if you want to stretch your budget by beach bumming all day for free. The key number to remember here is $200 to $250. That is your all-in, unavoidable cost for a single day if you add just one dive.
Makes sense. And the mid-range?
For the mid-range traveler or couple, this is an 8 out of 10. This is the absolute sweet spot for this island. It is unequivocally worth it for uncrowded, active escapes where you want comfort but don't need opulent luxury. Skip it if you need classic resort amenities like poolside cabanas and 24-hour room service. The key number is $130 to $220 a night for a highly comfortable room, which yields a total daily spend of roughly $220 to $320.
And what about the family?
For the family, I rate this a 4 out of 10. It is only worth it if you have highly active, older teenagers who want to log dives, and you can secure a multi-room cottage for $250 to $400 a night. Skip it entirely if you have toddlers, the cliffs are too dangerous, and the entertainment is zero. The T number is $3,500 to $5,000 for a week on the ground. Frankly, family money goes much, much further on other islands with better infrastructure.
What about the luxury segment?
For the luxury traveler, this gets a 7 out of 10. It is worth it for absolute pristine seclusion at the Scenery or Queen's Gardens at $350 to $500+ a night. Skip it if your definition of luxury strictly requires a beach butler handing you towels on the sand. The key number here is peak suites exceeding $400 to $500. And importantly, book now before this new luxury ceiling rises any further and drags the whole island's economy up with it.
Last one, the nomad.
Finally, for the digital nomad or solo traveler, a 5 out of 10. It is worth it for a short, incredibly safe, isolated stint to focus on a project. Skip it if you require lightning-fast, storm-proof internet or a vibrant co-working community. The key number is $1,800 to $2,800 a month just for lodging, pushing your total monthly budget to $3,000 to $4,500.
So the overall verdict, book carefully. Saba is deeply, profoundly worth it for active specialists who travel in the dry season, who embrace the verticality, and who purposefully pad their Sint Maarten connections to avoid the traps. But the 2026 and 2027 timing argument is intensely real. You need to lock in the under-tourism value right now before this new luxury tier pushes the baseline prices up forever.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you consider booking this trip. It is the fundamental, inescapable paradox of tourism. The very act of paying top dollar to experience genuine, untouched isolation is exactly the economic engine that eventually finances the infrastructure that destroys that isolation. By seeking out the unspoiled queen, we are the ones paying to pay for roads.
If this gave you the honest verdict you needed, follow the show. New episodes drop every day. That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.